President Trump, preparing for his joint address before Congress, goes on the offense over defense spending. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Bret Baier. We are coming to you tonight, you may see, from our outside of our normal location up on Capitol Hill. We're still up on Capitol Hill, but a different perspective to give you a little different view of the nation's capital. This will be our set for our special coverage of President Trump's address to a joint session of Congress. Also shaking things up tonight, President Trump asking for a major increase in funding the military while proposing a commensurate cut in non-military spending. It would fulfill another campaign promise. It's already getting pushback on the Hill behind me just one day before his big address, his first address before lawmakers. We have Fox team coverage from the White House tonight. Kevin Corke in the briefing room gets into the details of the proposals. But Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight with the latest developments from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Good evening to you, Brett. Event after event on the campaign trail, then candidate Donald Trump pledged to rebuild the U.S. military into a fighting machine that no nation would ever dare challenge. Today, he pledged to put the taxpayers' money where his mouth is. Unveiling his budget blueprint to the National Governors Association today, the president pledged an additional $54 billion for the Pentagon next year, an increase of nearly 10% over the current budget.
It will include a historic increase in defense spending to rebuild the depleted military of the United States of America at a time we most need it.
In his address to a joint session of Congress, President Trump will outline his plans to rebuild the military, increase border security, and reaffirm his yet-to-be-announced plans to take care of America's veterans. He'll also highlight economic opportunity based on regulatory reform, education, job training, and his 1-2 big-ticket items to repeal and replace Obamacare and dramatically reform the tax code.
The tax cut is going to be major. It's going to be simple. And the whole tax plan is wonderful, but I can't do it until we do health care, because we have to know what the health care is going to cost, and statutorily that's the way it is.
As the president prepares his speech and his budget, the White House was on defense today after it was revealed officials enlisted the chairman of the Congressional Intelligence Committees and the CIA director to refute reports of contact between Trump campaign staffers and Russian officials. After an intelligence briefing, Republican Congressman Devin Nunes called a reporter to shoot down the Russia story. He insisted he did nothing improper.
I was very clear with all of you about what I thought about that New York Times story. This was way in advance of the White House sending me one phone number, and I still don't understand what would be the problem of the White House sending me a number of a press person to call. Is it the whole point of the press to be transparent?
Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House committee, argued this is exactly the reason why an independent investigator must be appointed to look into the whole issue.
And for the White House to be seeking help from the intelligence leadership, either at CIA, FBI, or elsewhere, to knock down stories it doesn't like, is completely inappropriate.
Democrats insisting on an independent investigation got support from one Republican.
I want an investigation because I want this administration to be different than the last one that basically didn't want investigations of anything.
And a former president argued the nation needs to know exactly what went on, but stopped short of asking for an outside investigator.
I've never been a lawyer. I'm not sure the right avenue to take. I am sure, though, that question needs to be answered.
And the White House continues to go after leaks that are plaguing the president. Last week, Sean Spicer called together participants of a meeting where information leaked to look at their smartphones for evidence of applications that could be used to hide communications with journalists. Spicer reminded staffers that such apps run afoul of the Presidential Records Act. He was also looking for a couple of phone numbers associated with journalists, but officials won't say whether he identified any leakers yet. Brett?
More on all this with the panel. John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. Let's take a closer look now at the first Trump administration budget and how it's shaping up. A blueprint right now. Correspondent Kevin Corke is in the White House briefing room with a deeper dive into the numbers and the president's priorities.
This defense spending increase will be offset and paid for by finding greater savings and efficiencies across the federal government. We're going to do more with less.
To make the necessary investments to ensure his plan to upgrade the nation's military infrastructure, the president is proposing sweeping changes to the way the government handles your money. Among the White House's budget priorities, a massive increase in infrastructure spending, one that's expected to create jobs and improve the economy. A simplification of the tax code to reduce the burden on business and the middle class. And major cuts to both the State Department and the Environmental Protection Agency, long thought to be a target of the president's plan to end burdensome Obama-era regulations.
It is a true America First budget. It will show the president is keeping his promises and doing exactly what he said he was going to do when he ran for office.
Administration officials say the budget will also slash the amount of U.S. aid to foreign governments, but won't reduce investments in major entitlements like Social Security and Medicare.
We are not touching those now, so don't expect to see that as part of this budget. Okay, we are very focused on other aspects, and that's what's very important to us, and that's the president's priority.
The real battle for the White House will likely come on Capitol Hill, where it will have to convince skeptical Republicans and cut-wary Democrats, who today called the president's proposal a failure.
We don't know where the cuts are coming from, but it's hard to see with this magnitude of cuts that, once again, middle-class people, working families are going to be hurt.
Remember, this is the Republican Party, trickle-down economics, tax cuts for the rich, and if it trickles down to jobs, that would be great. If it doesn't, so be it. That's the free market.
Bret, the back and forth on the budget will likely continue for months with a May target date for finalization. A budget the president says will send a message to the world of America's strength, security, and resolve. Bret?
Kevin Corke in the White House briefing room. Kevin, thank you. Let's get some further insight now on this budget blueprint. Joining us tonight is the White House budget chief, Mick Mulvaney. Thanks for being here.
Bret, thanks for having me.
So if you were to explain somebody in an elevator what this was, and you had 30 seconds, what would you tell them?
An introduction, a top-line number. Your family sits down and says, okay, here's what we're going to spend this year on 3 or 4 of the large line items. That's what this was today. We broke out the numbers for the defense discretionary budget and the non-defense discretionary budget together. They're just over $1 trillion. This does not address things like mandatory spending, entitlement spending, tax policies. It's just a top-line budget on what we're going to try and spend this year.
So you've seen the criticism already coming from Capitol Hill. On one side, you have Senator John McCain and Mac Thornberry saying that $54 billion increase for defense is not enough. They'd like to see more. And on the other side, you have Chuck Schumer and Democrats saying that these cuts as previewed to non-discretionary spending outside of defense is just too much to take.
Yeah, in that sense, maybe it's the Goldilocks. It's just right. But really, what's more important is that the president didn't introduce this budget to try and make Congress happy. The president had me introduce this budget so that he could keep his promises. What you'll see in these numbers, Bret, are exactly what he campaigned on. That's all this is about. If he talked about it in the campaign and said he wants to do more of it, there's more of it in the budget. If he talked about it in the campaign and told people he was going to do less of it, there's less of it in the budget. So I understand the criticisms on both sides up on the Hill. That's fine, but that's not who this budget is targeted to. This budget is targeted to the people that Donald Trump represents.
I understand. And you are one of the founding members of the Freedom Caucus. As a congressman, you talked extensively about entitlements numerous times. Back in 2012, you said in a hearing that you were disappointed that all the discussion seems to be focused on the revenue side and not on the spending side, most specifically on the entitlement side. They're not putting it on the table. So are entitlements completely off the table when it comes to this budget when you get there officially by May?
Sure. A couple different points on that. Certainly it's off the table for now because this budget blueprint is not designed to address those types of things. When we get to the larger budget, the full budget in April and May, you will start to see the larger policy ideas that the president will bring forward. Things like tax reform, health care reform will be in there by that time as well. I don't know if you'll see infrastructure by that time or not. That may come a little bit later. But certainly there will be a time to deal with those larger issues. Whether or not we have a chance to talk about how to fix and save the entitlement programs. Another promise that the president made. You've seen the ads on TV. He will protect and save these programs, and he will. Whether we get to that in May remains to be seen, but you will see a lot more flesh on the bone between now and May.
But you know your former colleagues in the Freedom Caucus, how are they going to accept this if you can't really lay out how it's going to be paid for?
Well, we do pay for this. Again, we're here today talking about the president's budget blueprint, and it took $54 billion out of non-defense discretionary spending in order to increase defense spending. Again, entirely consistent with what the president said that he would do. So what's the president done? He's protected the nation, but not added any additional money to the 2018 deficit. This is a winning argument for my friends in the House, and a winning argument for a lot of folks all over the country. The president does what he says, but doesn't add for the budget. That's a win. Excuse me.
One of the things that you're going to take out or reduce is foreign aid. You know, if you zeroed out all the foreign aid, that's only about 1% of spending, actually less than 1% of the overall spending. If you zeroed it out, it wouldn't pay for 1 year of the budget increase as you have right now.
Correct. Again, this is a policy budget, however. The president's policy is we will spend less on other people overseas and more on defending ourselves and more money back home. And that's the genesis of looking very closely at the foreign aid budget. Again, what the president ran on. Went to the people, said, look, if you elect me, I will do this, and that's what the budget does. I understand the numbers. The foreign aid budget is a very small part of the overall budget, but it's the policy that's driving this decision, and again, entirely consistent with what people expected from this president.
Republicans had some trouble passing all the spending bills, and they're trying to get back to regular order, as you well know. 12 different spending bills. Do you think that the GOP will be able to pass 12 individual spending bills to get the government running, considering what you're asking them to do and the numbers you're putting on the table?
Well, I hope so. Over the course of the last couple of years, when I was sort of down the street on Capitol Hill, what we saw was that the White House, often assisted by the Senate Democrats, used the defense appropriation bill as a hostage. The defense appropriation bill was never allowed to get to the White House because the president wanted to leverage that. President Obama wanted to leverage that to get non-defense discretionary spending in other places, welfare spending in other places. This president wants an appropriations bill on his desk. I do hope, and I hope the president will assist me in encouraging Congress to get back to the ordinary appropriations process. It's way down in the weeds and sort of boring for folks who don't follow us very closely, but one of the biggest problems with the way this country is run and not run sometimes is that the appropriations process is broken. This president wants the appropriations process to work, and he would love to see appropriations bills that he can sign as quickly as possible.
Here's what's not in the weeds or not, people don't glaze over, and that is the shutdown of the government.
Sure.
And they see that as a real threat. A lot of people do. You have this deadline on a debt ceiling coming up, March 15th. It could extend, obviously. Are you going to use extraordinary measures again to try to subtract and add to be able to push that date forward?
Yeah, I think the date that technically the debt ceiling expires, or the extension that we passed a couple of years back, is March 15th. The Secretary of the Treasury actually makes the decision. I would expect him to do what all previous secretaries of the Treasuries have done, at least all the ones that I'm familiar with, to use those measures to sort of extend that date. But we will deal with it certainly before the August recess. As to the other issue you mentioned about the government shutdowns, no one desires that. We're a long way away from that. This is the introduction of the budget today, the budget blueprint, not the full budget. We can have those discussions another day.
But there'll be fighting within the GOP. You know that. You used to be one of the fighters.
Sure.
So if you come to April 28th and you don't have a deal, how do you avoid it?
What we've done today, Brett, is start that conversation. Say, look, here are the president's priorities. Here's how he thinks he should spend the money. The ordinary course of things is now for the House and the Senate to come up with their own ideas. But they now know where the president stands. What's the president's message to the House and the Senate? He wants to increase spending on defense. He wants to protect the nation, and he wants to do it without adding to this year's already high deficit. I think the deficit this year will be $488-odd billion. He doesn't want to see that number get any higher, and that's the message he sent to the House as we start this process.
Mick Mulvaney, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Brett.
Now to the president and the media. Our most recent Fox poll indicates the presidency has better approval numbers. 53% say they have confidence, 46% do not. For the media, the numbers are upside down, 44% to 55%. And guess who's not coming to dinner? That is the latest salvo in the president's ongoing war with what he calls fake news. Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, explains.
President Trump is continuing his assault on the media after his speech declaring major news outlets the enemy of the people. He tweeted yesterday that stories involving his associates' contacts with Russia are fake news put out by the Dems and played up by the media. But in the most buzzed about Beltway bombshell, Mr. Trump said he's skipping the White House Correspondents' Dinner. That springtime ritual where presidents poke at the press and political opponents, but are also subjected to a comedian's mockery. 6 years ago, he was the butt of his predecessor's barbs.
You got a room full of reporters, celebrities, cameras, and he says no. Is this dinner too tacky for the Donald?
Bloomberg had already announced it would cancel its annual glitzy party co-sponsored with Vanity Fair, which, along with The New Yorker, said they were pulling the plug because of Trump. The celebrity-studded dinner could suffer further without his presence. The last president not to attend was Ronald Reagan, recovering from an assassination attempt in 1981, and he called into the dinner. But the White House says this president doesn't want to socialize with those he views as his antagonists.
If a Girl Scout egged your house, would you buy cookies from her? I think that this is a pretty similar scenario.
Some news outlets are sending their own message about journalism in the Trump era. During the Oscars, the New York Times ran this ad. That drew a presidential response on Twitter. For first time, the failing New York Times will take an ad, a bad one, to help save its failing reputation. Try reporting accurately and fairly. But the last Republican president struck a very different tone this morning, brushing off the notion that the media are the enemy of the people.
I consider the media to be indispensable to democracy. That we need an independent media to hold people like me to account.
Yet it's a two-way street. In a new Wall Street Journal NBC poll, a majority, by 53 to 45%, agree that the media and other elites are exaggerating Trump's problems because they're uncomfortable and threatened by the change he represents. The president's demand that the press stop using unnamed sources drew a little pushback today when a senior OMB official did a press call on those budget cuts. Reporters questioned why the White House is putting out an anonymous source. Brett?
Hey, Howie, obviously the president took some hits at the Oscars. It wasn't the big news out of the Oscars because they had some troubles of their own. But he is speaking out about it again today with an interview with Bret Baier. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. With the Steve Bannon's, the former publication of Steve Bannon, the president going after the Oscars saying, if the people there, if Hollywood celebrities weren't so obsessed with politics, meaning going after him, perhaps they would have gotten it together a little better and avoided that embarrassing screw-up, talking about fake news at the end when the best picture was not La La Land. It actually was Moonlight.
Yeah, it was tough to watch. Howie, thank you. We heard from President Bush in Howie's piece. He will be Sean Hannity's guest tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll take a look at that. Up next, an update on repealing and replacing Obamacare. Where exactly is Congress and where's the White House? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 40 in Sacramento, as officials cut off flows from the Oroville Reservoir. This is supposed to allow the removal of debris from the bottom of the flood control spillway. Fears over the integrity of that spillway led to the evacuation of almost 200,000 people downstream earlier this month. Fox 10 in Phoenix with the start of the first malpractice trial against the Phoenix VA since the healthcare scandal broke 3 years ago. An 18-year Army veteran with terminal prostate cancer is seeking $50 million. He says his appointments were constantly canceled or rescheduled, and once he did get in, staffers failed to order follow-up testing after an abnormal exam. And this is a live look at Phoenix from our affiliate Fox 29. One of the big stories there tonight, about 500 headstones were vandalized at a Jewish cemetery. Police say they believe it happened after dark Saturday. The mayor says authorities are doing everything possible to find the attackers. This damage comes a week after 150 headstones were vandalized at a Jewish cemetery in St. Louis. Remember seeing the vice president on the cleanup there. Officials say bomb threats were called into 13 Jewish community centers and 7 Jewish day schools in a dozen states. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from before that big speech tomorrow in that building. Now that Congress is back from recess, Republican lawmakers are planning a big push for Obamacare legislation, a change, a repeal, a replace. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live tonight on Capitol Hill to tell us what GOP lawmakers are hoping to hear from the president tomorrow night. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. Key Republican lawmakers say they'll be listening very carefully tomorrow night as President Trump lays out his vision on the future of health care.
It's an unbelievably complex subject. Nobody knew that health care could be so complicated.
The president addressed the nation's governors and later met with top Republican lawmakers about scrapping Obamacare.
And we will replace it with a law that's better, that's more durable, that lowers costs, improves access to more affordable plans.
8 out of 10 Americans want it either entirely replaced or dramatically changed. The status quo is not an option, and what we'll be doing is not the status quo.
The president suggested earlier there might be wisdom in waiting.
Let it implode, and then let it implode in 18 even worse. Don't do anything. And they will come begging for us to do something. But that's not the fair thing to do for the people.
Wisconsin Republican Governor Scott Walker said that would be a disruption.
If we do nothing, and as was noted politically, for Republicans, maybe it would be great if we did nothing, because over the next 2 years, people would lose coverage because Obamacare is falling apart.
Virginia Democrat Governor Terry McAuliffe said the president and new HHS Secretary Tom Price haven't revealed any solid information about their plans.
The devil is in the details. I think the rhetoric of the campaign has hit the reality of governing.
The president likely got an earful during a meeting with health insurance executives today at the White House. Top Democrats continued defending the Affordable Care Act and issued this warning in a pre-buttal of the president's joint session speech.
They're just in a total pickle. They're hard right. The Freedom Caucus says we want to repeal, but we don't want to put any new money into this. And some of the more mainstream people from states that have used Medicaid to its advantage said we won't be for this unless you put money in it.
For example, 2 Ohio Republicans come at the issue from different viewpoints.
There are some very conservative Republicans in the House who are going to say, just get rid of the whole thing. And, you know, that's not acceptable when you have 20 million people or 700,000 people in my state.
We didn't tell the American people we're going to repeal it, except we're going to keep the Medicaid expansion. We told them we were going to repeal it and replace it with a market-centered, patient-centered plan that actually brings back affordable health insurance.
Republican leaders are feeling the pressure to get moving. A key figure in crafting the legislation says there have been daily changes to the House GOP plan, and there's an ongoing dialogue with the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office about how much all of it will cost. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. Let's get some analysis on the president's plans for health care and the rest of the budget. Syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer joins us from the Washington Bureau tonight. Charles, I want to start with the Obamacare repeal and replace, and how you think this is starting to develop and how specific perhaps the president may get in this address to a joint session tomorrow.
I guarantee you he will not be specific at all. First, because the specifics haven't been worked out, and second, because it's not where you'd want to do. This is essentially a State of the Union address, and he's going to just restate the principles that Republicans have been stating now for years, but that doesn't help you in crafting the new plan. I thought it was rather telling, that soundbite from the president. Nobody knew that health care could be this complicated. Well, I beg to differ on that slightly. Everybody knew. Perhaps the president hadn't been aware of it until he's now gotten into those details, meeting with the health insurance executives, meeting, of course, with Ryan and McConnell on the Hill. This is the most complicated subject in American politics, has been since Hillary Care back in the early 90s. And now it has been so ruined by Obamacare, which is internally collapsing, that it's really harder to fix now than it was even 10 or 20 years ago.
What do you think the timeline is where the administration, this president, should be given some leeway as they get their sea legs and get all the people in the right positions?
Well, on this, you're going to get leadership coming out of Congress. They presumably have been working, and in fact have been working on these alternatives for years. Their problem is that it is so expensive, so difficult, so complicated, they cannot agree, as you showed in that segment from Mike Emanuel. The White House is not going to be leading on this, it's going to be following, but it needs to have something coherent coming out of Congress.
All right, let's talk about defense spending. And obviously the headlines are $54 billion increase in defense spending in this budget blueprint moving forward. But there is obviously more to the perspective on defense spending.
Well, I mean, you've got to put it in perspective. It's been now, I saw the headlines before I came over, spike in defense spending, a 10% increase. The perspective is the following. 8 years ago, defense spending was 4.6% of GDP. Today it's 3.2%. That is a catastrophic collapse. That is a huge decrease. Remember the stories that you had just months ago about the cannibalizing of some of our airplanes to keep others in the air, the decrease in training. There has been a ruinous decline in defense spending. And what this is going to be a minor beginning to the rebuilding. I support it entirely, but as of now, I tend to side with John McCain that this may not be enough. So when you read the stories about this being sort of an enormous increase, and to put it in even a larger perspective, under the St. John Kennedy, defense spending was 10% of GDP. So we are about at a third that level, and we are in dire need with Russia, China, and Iran rising of correcting that. This is the beginning, the down payment on what's really needed.
Released a statement, Charles, in which he says President Trump intends to submit a defense budget that is a mere 3% above President Obama's defense budget, which has left our military underfunded, undersized, unready to confront threats to our national security. With a world on fire, America cannot secure peace through strength with just 3% more than President Obama's budget. We can and must do better. But you got to find the money someplace.
You got to find the money someplace. I don't think they really have it right now. The Reagan buildup, which essentially won the Cold War for us, didn't happen overnight either. It took a decade. And this probably will take something like a decade. But I think the administration is going to have to find something, and it may have to reduce some of the tax cuts in order to have the money for the military to be rebuilt.
We'll see. It's just a blueprint now. Charles, as always, thank you.
My pleasure.
The Pentagon has sent the White House its preliminary plan to defeat ISIS. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis briefed officials at the White House today. A Pentagon spokesman says there will not be a big rollout. He says it's a framework for a larger plan. He describes it as not just about Iraq and Syria, but what is called trans-regional. A spokesman would not talk about specific timelines or troop numbers. President Trump has lost another proposed civilian chief of a military branch. Businessman Philip Bilden has withdrawn his name from consideration as Navy Secretary. Bilden cites concerns about his ability to separate himself from his business interests. Earlier this month, the president's nominee for Army Secretary, Vincent Viola, expressed similar concerns for dropping out of contention. The confirmation vote for President Trump's pick to run the Commerce Department is expected near the top of the hour. Billionaire investor Wilbur Ross received little resistance from Senate Democrats during his hearing. Senators are also expected to move forward on the nomination of Montana Congressman Ryan Zinke as Interior Secretary tonight. The Dow today gained 16 to post its 12th consecutive record close. That is the longest streak in 30 years. The S&P 500 was up 2. The Nasdaq finished ahead 17. We are barely into the second month of President Trump's first term, but some Democrats are already calling for his impeachment. Others fear a backlash from a public weary of political obstructionism. Correspondent Doug McElway tells us where we are and how fast we got here.
I think that Donald Trump has already done a number of things which legitimately raised the question of impeachment.
But how legitimate is the intention by congressional Democrats to impeach President Trump? For Republicans, it's evidence the opposition party is becoming unhinged.
Do the Democrats understand they need to control the House of Representatives to impeach somebody?
The Democrats right now are living in an alternative universe.
Democrats are banking on Republicans turning coat if Trump's approval ratings plummet.
If they were to dip into the mid-30s or the low 30s or the high 20s, then you could foresee a situation where Republicans would begin to think that Mike Pence is a much better alternative.
Democrats see at least 2 potential articles of impeachment. First, Trump's decision not to fully divest from his business empire.
On day one, he was in violation of the Emoluments Clause. This is a part of the Constitution that says As the president, you can't get payments from a foreign power.
Ellison's charge is based on Trump's children now running his businesses. With no blind trust, experts say there is a risk of bribery.
If this results in a claim of bribery, and you can prove bribery by circumstantial evidence or something, that a foreign government is patronizing the Trump Hotel in exchange for some benefit in trade or military sales, that's bribery.
The second potential violation is the Trump team's alleged Russian connections.
Because this president absolutely was in collusion with the Kremlin and Putin in Russia during the campaign.
That, says Fine, is a weak argument.
And obviously what he did wasn't corrupting government. He isn't even president yet, exercising presidential powers. Verges on frivolity in my judgment.
Indeed, Republicans say the charges are thus far based on anonymous leaks and hearsay.
We still don't have any evidence of them talking to Russians.
Another explanation for all this impeachment talk is that it is all purely political. With no power in Washington, the Democrats' only recourse is to obstruct at every turn. Impeachment is one strand of spaghetti that they hope sticks to the wall. Brett?
Doug, thank you. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has denied the Trump administration's request to put the president's travel ban case on hold until he issues a new executive order. The three-judge panel did not give a reason. The court is extending the deadline for the Justice Department to file its opening brief until next week. SpaceX is planning to take 2 private citizens on a journey around the moon and back by late next year. Company founder Elon Musk says the 2 unnamed adventurers have already paid a significant deposit. He says this will be a, quote, opportunity for humans to return to deep space for the first time in 45 years, and they will travel faster and further into the solar system than ever before. President Trump and his chief of staff taking some interesting measures to try to plug the leaks coming out of the White House. This as an investigation up on the Hill continues. We'll continue to talk about that with our panel when we come back.
My first budget will be submitted to the Congress next month. This budget will be a public safety and national security budget, very much based on those 2, with plenty of other things, but very strong. And it will include a historic increase in defense spending to rebuild the depleted military of the United States of America at a time we most need it.
President Trump speaking today at the White House, talking about this budget blueprint that has been released today. You heard the OMB director earlier on this show talking about it, and an increase in defense spending from $54 billion. But overall, there are many people on Capitol Hill who are saying that may not be enough. Other Democrats saying it's too much taken from non-military spending. Let's bring in our panel tonight. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. And Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. And it is nice to have this view, but you also have the sirens that come with it. We don't think anything big's happening, but we'll check it out. Jonah, what about this and the rollout and what it means, signals for the budget battles ahead?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's sort of silly to call it a political document. Obviously, it's a political document, but it's trying to thread the needle of maintaining his campaign promises. I don't know really where President Trump gets this idea that it's a historic increase. It's an increase. I tend to side with McCain that it's not enough, but I also tend to side with Charles that it's going to take a decade to get up to the right levels. But he's in a difficult position where he is trying to be both a big booster of defense spending while at the same time living within our means. The EPA budget in total is $8 billion. The State Department is $65 billion. You're not going to get this money through those cuts. But, budgets never add up. So it's kind of hard to sort of say, oh, this is a special one. There are always sort of these political working documents that start a conversation.
Mar, this is the House Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader at the White House today.
So we're looking forward to a positive, upbeat presentation tomorrow night and then proceeding with our agenda which is exactly the same as the Trump agenda.
We just heard the budget numbers this afternoon. The new OMB director, who's a former member of the House Budget Committee, just gave us the numbers today. We just processed them. We haven't even processed them yet. As you know, with a new president coming in, you get top lines and then you get the budget later on. This is exactly how the system's supposed to work. We're very excited that they are actually giving us these numbers this early in the process so we can move forward with processing our budgets.
And speaking of process, you know, people sometimes glaze over when you start talking about all of this process. But this is a blueprint. You'll get the full budget probably in May, and Congress is going to churn around and see what the spending priorities are as well.
That's right. This is not a piece of legislation. This is the president's wish list and an expression of his priorities. What I think is interesting, though, is he's got something called the Budget Control Act. That's something to make people's eyes glaze over.
Sequestration.
Sequestrations, caps, hard caps on defense and domestic. If you want to, and it prevents you from raiding one pot to give to another. You can't pull from domestic and put it into defense unless you have 60 votes to raise the caps. And Democrats are going to say, okay, you want more for defense spending, which is pretty defensible, actually. We want more for domestic.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big fight.
And 60 votes is a big fight,
Yep.
Guy. When you're talking about no entitlements touched,
yep.
I didn't hear that from Mick Mulvaney. I heard, let's wait and see what it looks like in the real budget in May.
Right. So 2 points. First, on what we heard from the OMB director, I think it is indisputable when you look at the outline of this document. President Trump is following through on what he said he would do on the campaign trail, and that's a feather in his cap. You have to give him that. Unfortunately, one of the things he said he would not do on the campaign trail was reform entitlements, and that is a mathematical necessity. You know, Jonah went through some of the numbers. You can't get from here to there in terms of making the debt problem sustainable without serious entitlement reforms for future seniors. So my hope, especially as someone in the millennial generation, I'm being forced to pay into these programs, Social Security and Medicare, every single paycheck for years. But the budget folks, the mathematicians, they tell us, the actuaries, if you just project out 10, 15 years, these programs are going insolvent. So I wonder if there's a way to convince President Trump that he can keep his promise on the campaign trail to current and soon-to-be seniors while fixing and preserving these programs for people my age, because it is broken, deeply, deeply broken, and so far cricket's out of the White House.
Well,
and that's
but does that
I
get
asked
into
Sean Spicer that.
Does it get into semantics about I am saving it, I'm not touching this for people now?
Right. Well, I asked him that. What's the status of that promise? Is it just for current retirees? Is it for people nearing retirement, or is it for anybody paying in? I asked your question today, and he said his promise still holds. We're not going to change it. Well, that promise was pretty general. It was, we're not going to touch Social Security and Medicare. Did people hear that as in ever? We don't know.
I should point out that people sometimes get very upset when we talk about entitlements and Social Security. People say, I've been paying into this since I was a kid. That is the broad term that is used up on Capitol Hill. It is like an aircraft carrier, Jonah, and you have to start turning it. Otherwise, it's not going to turn.
No, that's right. And I think one of the interesting political stories here is that Paul Ryan, fought and bled to make entitlement reform a central part of the Republican platform, a central part of the Republican policy agenda. He took votes on it. He was the vice presidential nominee in 2012. It didn't hurt with Republicans. They still won seniors. And to see him just sort of fall on the battlefield on this issue will be kind of surprising, I think, in the long run. I think he still holds out hope that he can work out some sort of grand bargain with the White House, maybe sneak it in through the Obamacare repeal, get to Medicare that way. But that's still, no matter how we look at it, we're going to have a big fight.
Remember, Trump called it political suicide for Republicans to touch those entitlements.
It's not true. It's not true, though.
Well, that's what he said in the campaign.
To your point, the New York Times story on this says Trump and Paul Ryan head for a clash over the budget and ideology. That's their lead to this story. I want to play a soundbite of President Trump talking about infrastructure to the nation's governors today.
Infrastructure. We're going to start spending on infrastructure big. And not like we have a choice. It's not like, oh, gee, let's hold it off. Our highways, our bridges are unsafe. Our tunnels, I mean, we have tunnels in New York where the tiles are on the ceiling and you see many tiles missing. It's not like we have a choice. We have no choice. And we're going to do it. And it also happens to mean jobs, which is a good thing.
So he says it's not like we have a choice. We have to do it now, Guy. But every signal we're getting is that now really means 2018.
Yeah, and that's strikingly similar rhetoric to what we heard from the president's predecessor on these issues. Now, I think that no one should be surprised that President Trump is talking about infrastructure spending. I think it's something that Chuck Schumer has expressed some hope over. But again, where's the money going to come from? And if it's going to be a priority, that's fine. I think you can make a conservative argument for federal spending on these issues, certainly not to follow in the footsteps of the Obama stimulus early on with all those shovel-ready jobs that never materialized.
Jonah, we're hearing that Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has been working on a number of things, including getting private money for this public-private partnership that possibly will be an element, a big element of the infrastructure plan. But we don't have a lot of specifics, and
no, and there's reason to suspect, at least you hear it on Capitol Hill a bit, that as much as, and I think Donald Trump is absolutely sincere that he wants to do a big infrastructure thing, but I also think that the political people in the White House really want the issue of an infrastructure push, because that is the one thing that is very difficult going into a midterm election for Democrats to be against. It's basically stealing an issue from the Democrats, and you could see them have a political victory by having the issue, even if they don't get all the infrastructure across that they want.
If there's a bipartisan reach across the aisle, this is it, isn't it? Infrastructure?
This is the one thing that he has that really attracts Democrats. But we don't know if he's going to make a push for it this year.
That's the question. More with the panel on the...
At this point, what are we going to appoint a special prosecutor to do exactly? Look, if there's at some point we have serious crimes that have been committed, it would be something that we would consider. But at this point, we don't have that.
Why shouldn't we wait until the FBI is finished? We have our own responsibility to the public to investigate what the Russians did, what impact it had, whether there were U.S. persons involved. But I don't think we can afford to say, well, we'll simply wait until you've concluded, run down every lead.
Well, the chair of the Intelligence Committee in the House and the ranking Democrat talking about the investigations into Russia's influence before the election and possible communications between either the Trump campaign or the White House with Russia. Devin Nunes saying he hasn't seen any, and the investigations are continuing. One Republican over the weekend calling for an independent special prosecutor.
This is a man who I trust understands that businesses run on truth, government for once needs to run on truth. I want an investigation because I want this administration to be different than the last one that basically didn't want investigations of anything.
Darrell Issa, who's led many investigations, we're back at the panel. Jonah, what about all this?
It seems to me that it is an entirely defensible position to say we should get to the bottom of this. The problem is, I think it's pretty clear that Democrats want this as a political issue. They want to use it to beat up Trump. I don't find particularly persuasive the argument from Congressman Schiff that we can't wait until the FBI comes to a conclusion on this. If the FBI comes out with something, I mean, this is the same FBI that, you know, today's Monday, so I'm not sure whether the FBI is popular with Republicans or Democrats, you know, right now. But it seems to me that the FBI has perfectly legitimate, you know, had a perfectly legitimate role to take point on this, but at the same time, we really do need to figure out what happened. It's a serious issue.
Mark.
Look, no party wants to investigate a president of its own party. That's just a given. And Republicans don't want to say we should have a special prosecutor, with the exception of Darrell Issa, who has some credentials on this because he was a top investigator, but he also comes from one of the toughest districts in Congress, and he's probably thinking a little bit about that. He won by the skin of his teeth this last time. But the FBI is investigating, and the question is, can the intelligence committees in Congress do this by themselves, or do you need a special committee the way John McCain and Lindsey Graham want? Do you need a special prosecutor because Jeff Sessions shouldn't be in charge of it? These are all process questions, but I don't think that this is going to go away. The Democrats are going to keep on pushing for this, and if more information leaks out, there's going to be pressure on Republicans to do just what Darrell Issa did.
In the meantime, there are investigations on the leaks.
Yep, there are investigations
which are
on the leaks.
Both inside the White House and elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's legitimate as well, because you can't have people, particularly with classified information, just giving it to the press. That is a crime. Now, we in the press understand there is such a thing as whistleblowers and that sort of thing, but I completely understand where the president's coming from in expressing his outrage. I think part of that is genuine. Part of it also is trying to make sure there's another side of the story here and another side of the so-called narrative, word that we all hate.
Yeah, but there's a funny irony here. Is, just last week at CPAC, you had the President of the United States saying that these sources don't exist, that they're completely made up, it's fake, that there were no 9 sources on the Flynn story. And then this week you have the press secretary, you have Sean Spicer going around checking people's phones, doing an investigation to find out leaks that apparently don't exist.
And that immediately
That came from the White House. That came from the White House.
All right, here is the 43rd president talking about the relationship with the media.
Power can be very addictive, and it can be corrosive, and it's important for the media to call to account people who abuse their power. It's kind of hard to, tell others to have an independent free press when we're not willing to have one ourselves.
And you look at the latest NBC Wall Street Journal poll. We showed you the Fox poll earlier, but this mostly fair and objective about the media towards Trump? 41%, too critical, 51%.
Yeah, and there was another element of that same poll. Similar majority said that the press is exaggerating the problems within the Trump administration because they're fearful of him and they don't like him. So there's been a lot of hysterical or at least hostile coverage of this president from the mainstream press, and most Americans recognize what's going on and they're buying into the argument that Trump is making.
I mean, the internals in both our polls and the NBC Wall Street Journal, that's pretty decent for the Trump administration.
I think it's pretty decent for the Trump administration. What I thought the most interesting of George W.'s comments was the last thing where he says, how can we tell other countries that they should have democratic institutions like a free press if we work so hard to undermine them? The people might think the press is too critical. That's different than saying the press shouldn't do its job.
Sure, of course.
And we just asked them to stop the sirens. Thank you, panel. That's it for the panel. Up next, how one senior senator shows he's in pretty good shape.